Dad, we're having Thanksgiving dinner with some of Ricardo's colleagues from the base. Probably best if you come later in the evening. That cold, dismissive text from my daughter Maria felt like a knife to the chest. After driving 10 hours through a Colorado blizzard to spend Thanksgiving with my family, I was being pushed aside like an unwanted guest. 23 years of military service had taught me to read between the lines, and what I read in that message made my blood run cold. Something was terribly wrong. My grandson Diego hadn't answered his phone in 3 days. The boy who called me every Sunday to talk about art and college plans had gone completely silent. As I gripped the steering wheel of my old Ford F-150, fighting through the worst storm Colorado had seen in years, I had no idea I was about to discover something that would destroy my daughter's marriage and change our family forever. What I found when I finally reached their house wasn't just family dysfunction. It was something so shocking that it would land a decorated military officer in prison and force me to make the hardest decision of my life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My phone sat dead on the passenger seat, its black screen reflecting my weathered face. 3 missed calls to Maria's house, 2 to Diego's cell phone, and 1 frustrated attempt to reach that husband of hers, Colonel Martinez. The static from the radio crackled with weather warnings as I navigated the treacherous curves of Highway 25 south toward Colorado Springs, where the familiar silhouette of Cheyenne Mountain reminded me of the military community I'd once called home. The heater in my truck worked overtime, but it couldn't warm the cold knot of worry that had settled in my gut since receiving Maria's brief text yesterday. Dad, we're having Thanksgiving dinner with some of Ricardo's colleagues from the base. Probably best if you come later in the evening. No explanation, no warmth. Just the kind of military efficiency that left no room for questions. But questions were exactly what filled my mind as the miles rolled by. Diego hadn't answered his phone in 3 days, which wasn't like my grandson. The boy who used to call me every Sunday to talk about his art projects, his college plans, his dreams of studying graphic design at Colorado State University. The sensitive kid who'd rather sketch landscapes than throw footballs, much to his stepfather's obvious disappointment. Sarah would have known what to do. My wife had possessed an intuition about family dynamics that 40 years of marriage had taught me to trust completely. She could read between the lines of phone calls, detect trouble in the spaces between words. But Sarah had been gone for 2 years now, taken by cancer that fought harder than any insurgent I'd ever faced in combat. Now it was just me, a 62-year-old widower, trying to navigate family politics with the same tactical precision I'd once used to navigate minefields. The snow was coming down heavier now, fat flakes that stuck to everything and reduced visibility to maybe 50 yards. I'd driven through worse conditions in military convoys, but this felt different, more personal. More dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with weather. My mind drifted to the last time I'd seen Diego back in September when I'd driven down for his 18th birthday. The boy had seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn. When I'd asked him about college applications, he'd glanced nervously toward the kitchen where Colonel Martinez was preparing drinks, then mumbled something about still deciding and needing to think about practical careers. It was the first time I'd ever heard Diego sound uncertain about his future. The exit sign for Colorado Springs appeared through the snow like a beacon. Academy Boulevard stretched ahead, lined with the familiar mix of military housing, strip malls, and chain restaurants that characterized every base town I'd ever known. This place held memories of my own service years back when I was a young sergeant learning the ropes at Fort Carson before deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan had taught me the true weight of responsibility. As I turned into the Broadmoor Hills subdivision where Maria and her family lived, I noticed how quiet the streets were. Most families would be gathered around their dinner tables, by now sharing turkey and stories, creating the kind of warm memories that Thanksgiving was supposed to provide. The houses I passed glowed with golden light from their windows, each one a small beacon of domestic happiness in the storm. Maria's house sat at the end of Patriot Lane, a 2-story colonial with military precision in its landscaping and an American flag that snapped proudly in the wind despite the blizzard. Colonel Martinez's black Chevy Tahoe dominated the driveway, flanked by 2 other military vehicles I didn't recognize. Through the large front windows, I could see the warm glow of the dining room figures moving around what appeared to be a formal dinner setting. I pulled my truck to the curb and sat for a moment, engine idling, studying the scene. Something felt off, though I couldn't quite identify what triggered my tactical instincts. Maybe it was the way the house looked too perfect, too staged like a recruiting poster for military family life. Or maybe it was the complete absence of any sign that an 18-year-old lived there. Then I saw him. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me through the swirling snow. But as I leaned forward against the steering wheel, squinting through the storm, the image became horrifyingly clear. Diego sat hunched on the front steps of the house, his shoulders shaking with more than just cold. He wore nothing but a thin gray sweatshirt and jeans, no coat, no hat, no gloves. Snow had accumulated on his dark hair and shoulders, and even from 50 feet away, I could see his lips had taken on a blue tinge that every combat medic learns to recognize as the first sign of hypothermia. My grandson was freezing to death on his own front porch, while inside the house, warm light spilled from every window, and the sounds of laughter and conversation drifted out into the storm like a cruel mockery of everything Thanksgiving was supposed to represent. What I saw next made my blood run colder than the Colorado winter. I was out of my truck before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. 23 years of military training kicked in as I sprinted across the icy driveway, my combat boots finding purchase on the slippery pavement with the muscle memory of 1,000 tactical movements. The wind cut through my heavy winter coat like a blade, but Diego had no protection at all against the sub-zero temperatures that could kill a person in less than an hour. "Diego," I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the howling wind. Up close, the situation was even worse than I'd feared. My grandson's skin had taken on the waxy pallor I'd seen too many times in Afghanistan when soldiers were pulled from mountain rescue operations. His hands were pressed tight against his body, fingers curled into claws, as his nervous system fought to preserve core body temperature. "Grandpa," his voice came out as barely a whisper through chattering teeth. The relief in his eyes nearly broke my heart, but there was something else there, too. Fear. Not just of the cold, but of something deeper, more personal. I was already pulling off my heavy winter coat, wrapping it around his shoulders before he could protest. The boy was ice cold to the touch, his whole body trembling like he'd been electrocuted. "How long have you been sitting out here?" I asked, helping him stand on legs that could barely support his weight. "Since 11 this morning," he managed to say between violent shivers. 11 this morning. I checked my watch. 4:15 in the afternoon. Over 5 hours in weather that was currently registering 8 degrees below zero according to my truck's thermometer. This wasn't punishment. This was attempted murder. "We need to get you warm right now," I said, guiding him toward my truck where the heater was still running full blast. My combat medic training from the Army was already running through hypothermia protocols. Remove from cold environment, gradual rewarming, monitor for cardiac irregularities, get professional medical attention if severe. But as I helped Diego into the passenger seat and cranked the heat to maximum, my mind was also running tactical assessments. The warm glow from the house windows, the sounds of laughter and conversation, the multiple military vehicles in the driveway. This wasn't some family emergency or oversight. This was deliberate. "Diego," I said, wrapping an emergency blanket from my truck's survival kit around his shoulders, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Why are you sitting outside in a blizzard while your family is having dinner?" He stared down at his hands, which were slowly regaining feeling as the truck's heater worked to restore his circulation. "I messed up the dinner preparation," he said quietly. "Colonel Martinez said I needed to think about responsibility and consequences. You messed up how I kept my voice gentle, but every word was stoking a fire in my chest that had nothing to do with the truck's heating system. I was helping Mom set the table for the dinner party. She asked me to fold the napkins in the military style that Ricardo likes, the precise triangular fold." Diego's voice got smaller as he continued. "I couldn't get them exactly right. Some were a little crooked, not up to military standards. I had to grip the steering wheel to keep my hands from shaking with rage. And for that, he made you sit outside in a blizzard for over 5 hours. He said real soldiers don't make excuses for substandard work. That I needed to learn what consequences feel like before I embarrassed the family in front of his colleagues from the base." Diego pulled my coat tighter around himself. He locked the front door and told Mom that letting me back inside would only enable my lack of discipline. Through the windshield, I could see the warm golden light spilling from every window of the house. Silhouettes moved around the dining room table, and I could make out the distinctive postures of military personnel in their dress uniforms. A formal dinner party was in full swing while my grandson nearly died of exposure 20 feet away. "Diego," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "Has this happened before?" The question hung in the air between us. I could see him wrestling with whether to tell me the truth, probably weighing the consequences of honesty against the relief of finally having someone to tell. "Sometimes," he whispered, "when I don't meet his standards. Last month he made me stand at attention in the garage all night because I forgot to make my bed with hospital corners. And once he locked me in the basement for 2 days because I accidentally used the wrong fork at a dinner with his commanding officer." Each word felt like a physical blow. I looked at my grandson, this intelligent, artistic young man who'd never hurt anyone in his life, and saw the careful way he held himself, like someone who'd learned that existing could be dangerous if you didn't do it exactly. Right. Your mother knows about this, I said. It wasn't a question. She says Ricardo is just trying to prepare me for the real world, that I need to learn discipline and respect for authority. His voice cracked. Maybe she's right. Maybe I really am too weak, too undisciplined for stop. I turned in my seat to face him fully. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. What that man is doing to you isn't discipline, it's abuse. And it's going to end today. Diego's eyes went wide with panic. No, Grandpa, please. If you make a scene, he'll just take it out on me later. He always does. And Mom will side with him because she has to. She can't afford to lose this marriage. I could see the house through the windshield, still glowing, warm and inviting, still full of military personnel celebrating Thanksgiving, while a member of their host's family nearly froze to death outside. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. These were people who'd sworn an oath to protect and defend, yet they were complicit in the systematic abuse of a teenager. Listen to me carefully, I said, taking Diego's slowly warming hands in mine. You are 18 years old. You don't have to live like this anymore. And I'm not going to let you. But where would I go? I don't have any money saved. College is expensive, and without Ricardo's support, you'll come home with me tonight, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. We'll figure out the rest later. I could see hope and terror warring in his expression. Hope because maybe finally someone was going to stand up for him. Terror because he'd learned not to trust that things could actually get better. He won't let me leave, Diego said quietly. He'll call the military police, say you're kidnapping me, or that I stole something. He has connections everywhere on this base. I looked at the house again, at the warm lights and holiday decorations, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Sarah had always been the diplomatic one, the one who smoothed over family conflicts with patience and understanding. But Sarah wasn't here anymore, and diplomacy hadn't protected my grandson from 5 hours in sub-zero weather. Let me worry about Colonel Martinez, I said, opening the truck door. Right now, we're going inside to get your things. The snow was still falling as I stepped back into the storm, but this time I wasn't just fighting the weather. I was going to war. I sat in the truck for another moment, engine running, studying the house like I was planning a military operation. Because that's exactly what this was. The warm glow from the windows wasn't just holiday cheer anymore. It was enemy territory, and I needed intelligence before I made my move. Diego, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I need you to tell me everything. Not just today, not just the big incidents. Everything. He was finally starting to warm up, the violent shivering replaced by occasional tremors as his core temperature slowly returned to normal. But the fear in his eyes remained constant, the hypervigilance I'd seen in too many soldiers who'd been under fire too long. It started small when Mom married him 3 years ago, Diego began, his voice gaining strength as the feeling returned to his lips. Little comments about how I held my fork, how I walked, how I spoke to adults. He said Mom had been too permissive, that I needed to learn proper respect and discipline. I nodded, encouraging him to continue while my mind catalogued each detail like evidence in a court-martial proceeding. Then it got more structured. Daily room inspections with white glove tests. Push-ups for any infraction. Standing at attention for hours if I talked back or questioned his rules. Diego's hands were clenched in my coat. He made me call him Sir at all times, even at breakfast. Said it would teach me proper military bearing. And your mother went along with this. At first she tried to intervene, but Ricardo convinced her it was good for me. Said I was becoming a man and needed masculine guidance. The bitterness in Diego's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. He told her that her feminine coddling was why I was interested in art instead of sports, why I was soft and needed toughening up. Through the windshield I could see more clearly into the dining room now. Colonel Martinez sat at the head of the table in his dress blues, gesturing expansively as he told some story to his captivated audience. Other officers and their wives laughed at appropriate moments, wine glasses catching the light from the chandelier. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting of military family life. Tell me about the worst incidents, I said, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. Diego was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. 2 months ago, I accidentally broke one of his military awards while dusting his office. It was an accident, I swear, Grandpa. The shelf was too high, and I knocked it over trying to clean behind it. What happened? He made me stand in the backyard at attention from 6 in the morning until midnight for 3 straight days. No food, just water when he remembered to bring it. He said real soldiers learn to function on minimal rations, and that I needed to understand the value of military property. I had to close my eyes and count to 10. In Afghanistan, we'd court-martialed soldiers for less severe abuse of prisoners of war. What Martinez was doing to Diego violated every principle of military honor I'd ever been taught. The napkin incident today wasn't the first time he locked you outside, no sir. Diego had unconsciously slipped into military formality, probably a survival mechanism he'd developed. Last winter, during that big snowstorm in February, he locked me out overnight because I forgot to salute him when he came home from work. I slept in your truck that night when you came for Mom's birthday dinner. My truck. He'd slept in my truck on his mother's birthday while I was inside enjoying cake and thinking what a nice family gathering we were having. The guilt hit me like shrapnel. Why didn't you tell me then? I tried to hint, but you always talked to Mom afterward and she'd explain it away. Said I was being dramatic, that Ricardo was just trying to help me become more responsible. Diego's voice got smaller. After a while I started to think maybe they were right. Maybe I really was weak and undisciplined and needed this kind of correction. I studied my grandson's face in the dim light from the dashboard. Even now warmed and safe in my truck, he held himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned that relaxation could be punished. His eyes constantly flicked toward the house, monitoring for threats, even when he was supposedly protected. Diego, look at me. I waited until he met my eyes. I've served in combat zones for over 2 decades. I've trained thousands of soldiers, including some who came from difficult backgrounds and needed firm guidance. What Martinez is doing to you isn't military discipline. It's systematic abuse designed to break your spirit and make you compliant. But he says he's lying. My voice carried the authority of rank, and Diego straightened instinctively. Real military discipline builds character and confidence. It teaches soldiers to think critically and act decisively under pressure. What you're describing is psychological torture designed to create dependency and fear. Through the dining room window, I could see Martinez raising his wine glass in what appeared to be a toast. His audience of fellow officers lifted their glasses in response, all of them smiling and laughing, while 20 feet away the evidence of his crime sat shivering in my truck. There's something else, Diego said quietly. Something I haven't told anyone. I waited, giving him space to find the words. He's been talking about getting me into a military prep school. Says it would straighten me out, teach me proper discipline before I embarrass the family any further. But Grandpa, I've researched the place he's talking about. It's not accredited. It's one of those wilderness boot camps where kids have died from abuse and neglect. The pieces clicked together in my mind like a tactical puzzle solving itself. Martinez wasn't just abusing Diego. He was systematically isolating him, breaking down his self-worth, and preparing to ship him off to a place where the abuse could continue without witnesses. It was a perfect strategy for eliminating a problem while maintaining plausible deniability. That's not going to happen, I said, and the conviction in my voice seemed to surprise us both. Not while I'm breathing. I looked at the house one more time, taking in the warm lights, the holiday decorations, the perfect facade of military family values. Then I looked at my grandson, this brave young man who'd survived 3 years of systematic torture and still had the strength to hope for something better. Sarah used to say that some battles choose you whether you're ready for them or not. This was one of those battles. And unlike the wars I'd fought overseas, this one was personal. Stay in the truck, I told Diego, checking that the doors were locked and the heater was still running. Keep warm, keep the engine running, and if anything goes wrong, you drive straight to the military police station on base. You tell them everything you just told me. Grandpa, what are you going to do? I stepped out into the blizzard, my boots crunching on the snow-covered driveway. The wind cut through my sweater like ice, but I barely felt it. All my attention was focused on the warm, inviting house, where a group of military officers was enjoying their Thanksgiving dinner while complicit in the abuse of a child. I'm going to remind Colonel Martinez what honor actually means. The front door of the house stood before me like a checkpoint I'd approached 1,000 times in hostile territory. But this time the enemy wasn't wearing a different uniform or speaking a foreign language. This time, the enemy wore the same dress blues I'd once worn with pride, and he was hiding behind the very values I'd spent my career defending. I stood on the covered porch for a moment, brushing snow from my shoulders and listening to the sounds of celebration filtering through the heavy wooden door. Laughter, the clink of silverware against china, the low murmur of military shop talk that I recognized from countless officers' club dinners throughout my career. Normal sounds. Civilized sounds. The kind of sounds that made what was happening to Diego even more obscene. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the door, I could see the warm glow of the foyer chandelier and the movement of figures in dress uniforms. A formal military dinner party, complete with protocol and proper etiquette. The irony wasn't lost on me that these people sworn to protect and defend were breaking bread, while a member of their host's household had nearly died of exposure just outside their view. My tactical mind was already working, assessing the situation like a mission briefing. Primary objective, confront Martinez and extract Diego safely. Secondary objective, document the abuse for potential legal action. Potential complications, multiple military personnel present, possible career implications for everyone involved, Maria's conflicted loyalties. But there was another voice in my head, quieter but more insistent. Sarah's voice reminding me that sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting the consequences, whatever they might be. She'd always said that a man's character wasn't measured by his rank or his decorations, but by what he did when no one was watching, and no one would thank him for it. I thought about Diego sitting in my truck, probably watching me through the rear window, hoping I could somehow fix 3 years of systematic abuse with one conversation. The trust in his eyes when he'd finally told me the truth. The way he'd unconsciously straightened when I'd spoken with authority, still responding to military bearing, even after everything Martinez had put him through. The boy deserved better than this. He deserved a family that celebrated his artistic talents instead of trying to beat them out of him. He deserved adults who built him up instead of tearing him down in the name of discipline. He deserved the chance to become the man he was meant to be, not the broken soldier Martinez was trying to create. I checked my watch. 4:35 in the afternoon. In military terms, I was about to initiate contact with a superior officer in his own home, in front of witnesses regarding conduct that could end his career. The smart play would be to work through proper channels, file reports, let the system handle it. But the system had already failed Diego for 3 years, and he couldn't survive another night of Martinez's idea of discipline. The sound of my knuckles against the heavy door echoed through the foyer like gunshots. The conversation inside paused momentarily, then resumed as footsteps approached from the other side. I straightened my shoulders and set my jaw, calling on every ounce of command presence I'd developed over 2 decades of leading soldiers in peace and war. The door opened to reveal Maria, my daughter, dressed in an elegant black cocktail dress, with her dark hair styled in the kind of perfect military wife updo that Sarah had always refused to attempt. She looked beautiful and polished, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. "Dad," her voice carried surprise and something that might have been relief. "I thought you weren't coming until later. We're still in the middle of dinner with Ricardo's colleagues from the base." "I need to speak with your husband," I said, keeping my voice level, but letting just enough steel show through to indicate this wasn't a social call. "Now." Maria's eyes flicked nervously toward the dining room where the conversation had grown quieter. Military personnel had finely tuned situational awareness, and they'd definitely noticed the change in household dynamics. "Dad, this really isn't a good time. We have guests and Ricardo is trying to make a good impression on his new commanding officer. Could we maybe talk after dinner? Your son is sitting in my truck suffering from hypothermia because your husband locked him outside in a blizzard for over 5 hours. I said loud enough for my voice to carry into the dining room. I'd say this is exactly the right time. The effect was immediate. The conversation in the dining room stopped, completely replaced by the kind of charged silence that precedes either violence or revelation. Maria's face went white, her hand gripping the doorframe for support. "Dad, please," she whispered. "You don't understand the situation." Diego was being disciplined for folding napkins incorrectly. My voice cut through her explanation like a blade. "I understand the situation perfectly, Maria. The question is whether you do." From the dining room came the sound of a chair being pushed back, followed by measured footsteps across hardwood floors. Colonel Ricardo Martinez appeared in the foyer, still wearing his dress blue uniform with its array of ribbons and decorations. He was a big man, probably 6'2" and well over 200 pounds, with the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. Under different circumstances, I might have been impressed by his military bearing. "Sergeant Major Ashcroft," he said, extending his hand with the practiced smile of a career officer. "What an unexpected pleasure. Maria mentioned you might join us later this evening." I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then met his eyes without taking it. In military circles, refusing a superior officer's handshake was tantamount to a declaration of war. Everyone in the foyer understood exactly what that gesture meant. "Colonel Martinez," I said, my voice carrying the kind of formal courtesy that barely concealed contempt. We need to discuss your methods of discipline. His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Behind him, I could see other officers gathering in the doorway, between the foyer and dining room, drawn by the obvious tension. A major, two captains, and what looked like a full colonel, all in dress uniforms, all watching this confrontation unfold in their colleague's home. I'm not sure what you mean, Martinez said, but his eyes had gone cold and calculating. Perhaps we could discuss this privately after our guests have left. No, I said, stepping fully into the foyer and letting the door close behind me. We're going to discuss this right now in front of everyone. Because what you've done to my grandson isn't a private family matter. It's a violation of everything these uniforms are supposed to represent. The silence that followed was so complete. I could hear the wind howling outside and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Martinez's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and I saw his hands clench slightly at his sides. But he was trapped by the presence of his guests, forced to maintain the facade of the perfect military family, even as I prepared to tear it down. Gentlemen, I said, addressing the other officers directly, I think you should know exactly what kind of man you're dining with. The dining room fell silent as I stepped past Martinez into the heart of his perfect military dinner party. The table was set like something from a Pentagon protocol manual, crystal glasses, fine china, silver service, arranged with geometric precision. 5 officers and their spouses sat frozen, mid-conversation, wine glasses halfway to their lips, as they processed the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure that every combat veteran learns to recognize. Colonel Harrison, I said, addressing the full colonel I recognized from my own service days at Fort Carson, Major Williams, Captains Rodriguez and Chen. I nodded to each officer in turn, using the formal military courtesy that made my next words carry even more weight. I apologize for interrupting your Thanksgiving dinner, but I believe you should know that your host has been systematically abusing my 18-year-old grandson for the past 3 years. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Major Williams set down his wine glass with a sharp clink. Captain Rodriguez's wife gasped audibly. Colonel Harrison's face went stone-cold, serious, the expression of a senior officer who'd just heard an allegation that could destroy careers and end friendships. That's quite an accusation, Sergeant Major Colonel Harrison said carefully. Perhaps you'd like to elaborate. Martinez stepped forward, his face flushed but his voice controlled. Gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. My father-in-law is understandably upset about a minor disciplinary issue involving his grandson. Perhaps we could discuss this privately and allow you to enjoy your dinner. Minor disciplinary issue. I turned to face Martinez, directly letting every ounce of my contempt show in my voice. You call leaving a teenager outside in 8-degree weather for over 5 hours a minor disciplinary issue. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Captain Chen leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from social politeness to professional concern. What exactly happened, Sergeant Major? When I arrived here 30 minutes ago, I found Diego sitting on the front porch in nothing but a sweatshirt and jeans. He'd been locked outside since 11 this morning because he folded napkins incorrectly for this dinner party. I gestured toward the perfectly set table. While you were all enjoying this elegant meal, that boy was developing hypothermia 20 feet away. Now wait just a minute, Martinez said, his military composure beginning to crack. Diego was given clear instructions about proper presentation standards. When he failed to meet those standards, he needed to learn about consequences and consequences. I stepped closer to Martinez, close enough that he had to look up slightly to meet my eyes. Colonel, I've served in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've seen what real military discipline looks like. What you're doing to that boy isn't discipline. It's torture. Colonel Harrison stood up from his chair, his full authority filling the room. Sergeant Major Ashcroft, these are serious allegations. Are you prepared to substantiate them? Yes, sir. I straightened to attention, falling back on 23 years of military bearing. For the past 3 years, Colonel Martinez has subjected my grandson to systematic abuse disguised as military discipline. Forced standing at attention for hours. Denial of food. Confinement in basements and garages. Physical punishment for minor infractions like using the wrong fork or failing to make his bed with perfect hospital corners. Maria had been standing in the doorway, but now she moved into the room, her face pale and her hands shaking. Dad, please, you're making this sound worse than at Island. Ricardo has been trying to teach Diego responsibility and respect. Responsibility. I turned to my daughter, and the disappointment in my voice made her flinch. Maria, when you were 18, and you dented my car, Did I lock you outside in a snowstorm? When you failed your chemistry test, did I make you stand at attention in the garage all night? The other officers were exchanging glances. Now, the kind of silent communication that happens between military personnel when they're processing information that could have serious consequences. Major Williams cleared his throat. Colonel Martinez, he said carefully, perhaps you could explain your side of this situation. Martinez straightened his uniform jacket, clearly trying to regain control of the narrative. Gentlemen, Diego is not my biological son. When I married Maria 3 years ago, the boy was undisciplined, disrespectful, and completely lacking in any sense of structure or accountability. I've been trying to instill in him the values that made us all successful military officers. By nearly killing him with exposure, Captain Rodriguez's voice carried the sharp edge of a man who'd seen too much real combat to tolerate manufactured hardship. The boy was never in any real danger, Martinez said, but I could hear the defensiveness creeping into his voice. He was dressed appropriately for the weather, and the exercise was designed to teach him about perseverance, and he was dressed in a sweatshirt and jeans in 8-degree weather. I interrupted. When I found him, his lips were blue and he couldn't feel his hands. That's not character building, Colonel. That's attempted homicide. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in Colonel Harrison's mind as he processed the implications. An allegation of child abuse against a serving officer was career-ending under the best circumstances. An allegation with multiple witnesses was catastrophic. There's more, I continued, pressing my advantage. Colonel Martinez has been planning to send Diego to one of those wilderness boot camps where children have died from abuse and neglect. He's systematically isolated the boy, destroyed his self-confidence, and created a pattern of fear and dependency that would make any interrogator proud. Martinez's face had gone from flushed to ashen. You have no proof of any of this. It's the word of a bitter old man against a serving officer with an exemplary record. Actually, said a quiet voice from the doorway, he has my word too. We all turned to see Diego standing in the entrance to the dining room, still wrapped in my winter coat, but with his shoulders squared and his chin raised. The fear was still there in his eyes, but it was overshadowed by something stronger. Determination. The kind of courage that runs in families and shows up when it matters most. Diego Martinez said, his voice carrying a warning that everyone in the room could hear. Go back to your room. This doesn't concern you. Yes, sir, it does, Diego said, and I heard the strength in his voice that I'd been hoping to find. It concerns me very much. Colonel Harrison looked between Martinez and Diego, then back at me. 25 years of military experience had taught him to recognize truth when he heard it, and the truth was standing in front of him in an oversized winter coat with hypothermia still pink in his cheeks. Son, Colonel Harrison said gently, would you like to tell us what happened today? Diego stepped fully into the dining room, my winter coat still dwarfing his slight frame, but there was nothing small about his presence now. The room full of military officers waited in absolute silence as he found his voice the same voice that had whispered in fear just an hour ago. Yes, sir, Colonel Harrison, Diego said, his words clear and steady. I'd like to tell you what happened today and what's been happening for the past 3 years. Martinez moved toward him, but Colonel Harrison held up a hand. Colonel, please remain where you are. Son, go ahead. This morning I was helping my mother prepare for your dinner party. I was asked to fold the napkins in the military triangular style that Colonel Martinez prefers. Diego's voice grew stronger with each word. Some of my folds weren't perfect. They were crooked by maybe a 1/4 inch. When Colonel Martinez inspected them at 10:45, he said, I had embarrassed the family and disrespected his guests before they even arrived. Captain Chen leaned forward in his chair. What happened then? He ordered me to assume the position of attention on the front porch and told me to think about the consequences of substandard performance. He locked the front door and instructed my mother that letting me inside would only enable my lack of discipline. Major Williams set down his fork completely. How long were you outside, son? From 11 this morning until my grandfather found me at 4:15 this afternoon, sir. Over 5 hours in what the Weather Service reported as 8 degrees below zero. The collective intake of breath from the dinner guests was audible. These were people who understood military precision, who knew the difference between tough training and criminal negligence. What Diego was describing crossed every line of acceptable conduct. Diego, that's enough, Martinez said sharply. You're exaggerating again, making yourself sound like a victim when you know perfectly well. I'm not finished, sir, Diego interrupted, and the quiet authority in his voice silenced Martinez completely. Colonel Harrison asked me a question, and I'm going to answer it completely. I felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly knocked me over. This was the moment when my grandson stopped being a victim and became a survivor. Last month, Colonel Martinez made me stand at attention in the garage from midnight until 6 in the morning because I forgot to make my bed with hospital corners. 2 months ago, he locked me in the basement for 48 hours with only water because I accidentally knocked over one of his military awards while dusting. Colonel Harrison's face had gone granite hard. Continue. 3 weeks ago, he told me he was enrolling me in a wilderness military academy in Utah. When I researched the facility, I discovered it's been investigated multiple times for abuse and has had 2 student deaths in the past 5 years. Diego's voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. He said it would teach me to be a real man instead of the weak artistic disappointment I've become. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the wind howling outside and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Every person in that room understood they were witnessing something that would end careers and destroy lives. Martinez finally exploded. This is ridiculous. You're all listening to the fantasies of a troubled teenager who's been coached by a bitter old man who never approved of my marriage to his daughter. His voice rose to nearly a shout. Diego has behavioral problems. He's disrespectful, undisciplined, and completely unable to function in a structured environment. Structured environment. Captain Rodriguez stood up from his chair, his face flushed with anger. Colonel, I've served 3 combat deployments. I know what military discipline looks like. What you're describing isn't structure. It's systematic abuse. You don't understand the situation, Martinez said desperately. The boy needs firm guidance. His mother was too permissive, too emotional. I've been trying to prepare him for the real world to teach him that actions have consequences. By nearly killing him, Major Williams's voice cut through Martinez's explanation like a blade. Colonel, I have 2 teenage sons. If anyone treated them the way you've treated this boy, I'd have them arrested. Martinez looked around the room, seeing his career crumbling in the faces of his colleagues. Then his expression changed, becoming calculating and dangerous. You know what? Fine. You want to make this official. Let's make it official. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number with sharp, angry movements. This is Colonel Ricardo Martinez, ID number 77492 Alpha. I need military police at my residence immediately. I want to report a kidnapping and elder abuse situation. The room erupted. Maria gasped. Colonel Harrison cursed under his breath, and I felt my jaw clench as I realized Martinez was playing his final card. That's right, Martinez continued into the phone, his eyes locked on mine. Sergeant Major Bertram Ashcroft has unlawfully removed my stepson from my home and is making false accusations designed to destroy my military career. The man is clearly suffering from some form of dementia or psychological break. Ricardo, stop, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please just stop. But Martinez was beyond stopping. He was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals were always the most dangerous. I want him arrested for kidnapping, making false statements, and interfering with a military family. And I want a psychological evaluation to determine his fitness for Colonel Martinez. Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the tirade like a command. End that call. Now, sir, with respect, this man has end. That. Call. Colonel Harrison's voice carried the absolute authority of a combat commander who would not be disobeyed. Martinez reluctantly hung up the phone, but the damage was done. Military police would be here within minutes, and the situation was about to become official in ways that none of us could control. Gentlemen, Colonel Harrison said, addressing the other officers, I think it's time we made some phone calls of our own. Major Williams, contact the base commander. Captain Rodriguez, call the Inspector General's office. Captain Chen, I want you to document everything we've witnessed here tonight. He turned to Diego, and his voice gentled. Son, you're going to need to tell this story several more times to people who can do something about it. Are you ready for that? Diego looked at me then, back at Colonel Harrison. Yes, sir. I'm ready. Outside, I could hear the distant wail of sirens cutting through the wind. The military police were coming just as Martinez had requested, but they weren't coming to arrest me. They were coming to arrest him. The military police arrived in 2 vehicles, their red and blue lights cutting through the swirling snow like beacons of justice. Through the front windows, I could see Sergeant First Class Morrison and Staff Sergeant Kim stepping out of their patrol cars, both officers I recognized from my years at Fort Carson. Professional, thorough, and absolutely incorruptible. Colonel Harrison opened the front door before they could knock. Sergeant Morrison, Staff Sergeant Kim. Thank you for responding so quickly. Sir Sergeant Morrison said, removing his military police helmet as he stepped into the foyer. We received a call about a kidnapping and elder abuse situation. Can you brief us on what's happening here? There's been no kidnapping, Colonel Harrison said firmly. What we have is a credible allegation of systematic child abuse against Colonel Martinez, with multiple military witnesses and physical evidence. Martinez stepped forward, his dress uniform still immaculate, but his composure completely shattered. Sergeant Morrison, I'm the one who called. This man, he pointed at me unlawfully, removed my stepson from my home, and has been making false accusations designed to destroy my career. Sergeant Morrison looked between Martinez and Colonel Harrison, his experienced eyes already reading the room dynamics. Sir, perhaps we could speak with all parties separately and get a clear picture of what's transpired here. That won't be necessary, said a quiet voice from the stairway. We all turned to see Maria descending the stairs carrying a large cardboard box in her arms. Her perfect dinner party appearance was gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger, somehow more like the daughter I remembered before she'd married Martinez. Mom, Diego stepped toward her, uncertainty in his voice. Maria set the box down on the foyer table with a heavy thud. These are Diego's belongings, she said, her voice steady but tired. Everything he'll need for college and beyond. Martinez stared at her in shock. Maria, what are you doing? I'm choosing my son, she said simply. I should have done it 3 years ago. She turned to Sergeant Morrison. Officer, my husband has been systematically abusing my son for the past 3 years. I have documentation, photographs of injuries, and medical records from when I took Diego to the emergency room last winter after Ricardo locked him outside overnight. The bottom dropped out of Martinez's world. Maria, you can't be serious. We discussed this. Diego needs structure discipline. Diego needed a father figure, not a prison warden, Maria said, and there was steel in her voice. I hadn't heard since she was a teenager, standing up to bullies at school. I've been keeping records, Ricardo. Every incident, every punishment, every night I had to sneak food to my son because you decided he didn't deserve dinner. Sergeant Morrison pulled out his notebook. Ma'am, are you willing to provide these records as evidence in an official investigation? Yes, Maria said without hesitation. And I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning. The transformation in the room was immediate and complete. Martinez, who had commanded respect and authority just hours ago now, looked like exactly what he was, a man whose carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled. The other military officers stood in uncomfortable silence, already mentally distancing themselves from a colleague whose career was over. Colonel Martinez, Sergeant Morrison said formally, based on the allegations and evidence presented. I'm placing you under investigation for multiple counts of child endangerment and abuse. You'll need to come with us for questioning. This is insane, Martinez said, but his voice lacked conviction. These people are lying. They're trying to destroy me because you nearly killed a kid over napkin folding. Staff Sergeant Kim's voice carried the disgust of a father who understood exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. Sir, I've seen the evidence. I've talked to the witnesses. The only person who destroyed your career is you. As the military police led Martinez toward the door, he turned back one last time. Maria, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. You'll lose everything. The house, the benefits, the lifestyle. You'll have nothing. Maria looked at Diego, then at me, then back at her, soon-to-be ex-husband. I'll have my son, she said. That's everything. After Martinez was taken away, the house felt different. Lighter somehow, as if a poisonous presence had been lifted from the air. The military officers began making their excuses and departing, but not before each one approached Diego to shake his hand and tell him how proud they were of his courage. Colonel Harrison was the last to leave. Sergeant Major, he said, extending his hand, you did the right thing tonight. That took real courage. Just protecting family, sir, I replied, accepting his handshake. That's what real soldiers do, he said. Then he turned to Diego. Son, if you ever decide you want to serve your country, you come see me. We need men with your kind of integrity. After everyone left, the three of us sat in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of what had been Martinez's perfect military household. The formal dining room still held the abandoned dinner party crystal glasses, half full of wine, plates of cold turkey growing congealed in the sudden quiet. What happens now? Diego asked, and for the first time in hours he sounded like the uncertain teenager he really was. Now we go home, I said. Both of you. You'll stay with me until we figure out the next steps. Maria looked around the house she'd called home for 3 years. I can't afford this place on my own. I'll have to sell it, find an apartment somewhere. Or I said carefully, you could move back to Denver. The house is paid off, there's plenty of room, and Diego could still attend Colorado State like he planned. Mother and son looked at each other, a whole conversation passing between them in silence. I'd like that, Diego said quietly. I'd like to come home. Maria smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. Then that's what we'll do. As we packed the last of their belongings into my truck, I thought about Sarah, and how proud she would have been of the way this ended. Not with violence or revenge, but with truth and justice, and the kind of quiet courage that builds families instead of destroying them. The snow had stopped falling, and through the clearing clouds I could see the first stars beginning to appear. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Legal proceedings, therapy for Diego, rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by years of fear and silence. But tonight, driving home through the Colorado darkness with my family safe beside me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah died. Hope. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my Denver home, watching through the window as Diego worked in Sarah's old garden, his hands gentle as he tended the tomato plants we'd planted together in the spring. The young man kneeling in the rich Colorado soil bore little resemblance to the broken teenager I'd found freezing on that Thanksgiving porch. His shoulders were straight, his movements confident, and when he looked up and waved at me through the window, his smile held no trace of the fear that had once defined him. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first month had been the hardest, filled with nightmares, panic attacks, and the slow, painful process of learning to trust that safety was real and permanent. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the trauma counselor we'd found, had warned us that healing from systematic abuse was like physical therapy for the soul. Progress came in small increments with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. But Diego had shown the same quiet courage in recovery that he'd displayed that night in Martinez's dining room. He'd attended every therapy session, worked through every painful memory, and slowly begun to believe what Maria and I had been telling him all along, that he was worthy of love, respect, and the chance to become whoever he wanted to be. The acceptance letter from Colorado State University's School of Art and Design sat framed on the mantelpiece right next to his high school diploma, and the scholarship award that would cover his full tuition. The boy who'd been told he was weak and undisciplined had graduated summa cum laude and earned recognition as one of the most promising young artists in the state. Grandpa Diego called from the garden, "The tomatoes are coming in beautifully." Grandma Sarah would have been proud of this harvest. I stepped outside onto the back porch, breathing in the warm summer air that carried the scent of growing things and second chances. "She would have been proud of you," I said. "Not just the garden, but everything you've accomplished." Diego stood up, brushing soil from his hands. At 19, he'd grown into himself in ways that went beyond physical height. There was a groundedness to him now, a sense of purpose that came from surviving something terrible and choosing to use that experience to help others. "I got the letter from the volunteer coordinator at the Children's Advocacy Center," he said, walking over to join me on the porch. "They want me to start training next month to work with kids who've been through situations like mine." The pride I felt was so strong it nearly took my breath away. This young man, who had every right to be bitter and angry, wanted to use his pain to help other children find their way to safety. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I think so," Diego said thoughtfully. "Dr. Hoffman says that helping others heal can be part of our own healing process. And I keep thinking about all the kids who might be sitting on cold porches right now believing they deserve it." Through the sliding glass door, I could see Maria in the kitchen preparing dinner with the same focused attention she'd once brought to Martinez's impossible standards. But now she cooked because she enjoyed it, because feeding her family was an act of love rather than a performance to be judged. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, and while the financial adjustment had been challenging, the emotional freedom was worth every sacrifice. She'd found work as a librarian at the local elementary school, a job that allowed her to use her education degree while staying close to home during Diego's transition. More importantly, she'd found her voice again, the strength that Martinez had spent 3 years trying to suppress. "You know," Diego said, settling into one of the porch chairs Sarah had loved, "I used to think that what happened to me was my fault. That if I'd been stronger, more disciplined, more like the son Martinez wanted, none of it would have happened. And now I understand that abuse is never about the victim. It's about the abuser's need to control, to feel powerful, by making someone else feel powerless." He looked at me with eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. "What Martinez did to me says everything about who he was and nothing about who I am." The court-martial had been swift and decisive. Martinez had been stripped of his rank, dishonorably discharged, and sentenced to 2 years in military prison for child endangerment and abuse. The other charges, assault, unlawful imprisonment, and violation of his oath as an officer, had added another 3 years to his sentence. He would never wear a uniform again, never hold authority over another human being in any official capacity. But more importantly, his actions had sparked a wider investigation into abuse within military families, leading to new protocols, better training, and resources for children who found themselves trapped in situations where the very people sworn to protect society were the ones causing harm. "I've been thinking about that night a lot lately," I said, watching as the sun began to set behind the Rocky Mountains. "About the moment you walked into that dining room and decided to tell the truth even though you were terrified." "I was terrified," Diego admitted, "but I was also tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of pretending everything was normal, tired of believing that I deserved to be treated like a prisoner in my own home. That took real courage. You taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid." Diego smiled. "That's a lesson I learned from watching you that night." As the evening settled around us, Maria joined us on the porch with 3 glasses of iced tea and the comfortable presence of someone who'd finally found peace in her own skin. We sat together in the gathering dusk, 3 generations of a family that had been broken and rebuilt, scarred but not defeated. "I have something to tell you both," Diego said, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I've decided to change my major." Maria and I exchanged glances. To what she asked, "Social work with a specialization in child advocacy. I want to become the person I needed when I was trapped in that situation. I want to be the adult who listens, who believes, who takes action when children are being hurt." The silence that followed was filled with understanding and pride. This young man who had survived systematic abuse and emerged with his compassion intact wanted to dedicate his life to protecting other children from experiencing what he'd endured. "Your grandmother always said that the best way to heal from pain is to help others avoid it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She was a wise woman," Diego replied. "I wish I could have known her better." "You carry the best parts of her with you," Maria said softly. "The kindness, the strength, the refusal to let hard circumstances make you hard." As the first stars began to appear in the Colorado sky, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The phone call that had saved a life. The courage to confront evil when it wore a uniform and hid behind authority. The choice to believe in healing rather than revenge. Most of all, I thought about the power of family. Not the family you're born into, but the family you choose to create through love, protection, and the willingness to fight for what's right no matter the cost. "If this story has touched your heart," I said, looking directly at Diego and Maria, "then remember this abuse thrives in silence and dies in the light of truth. If you know a child who needs help, be their voice. Be their advocate. Be the adult who chooses to act rather than look away." Diego nodded solemnly. "And if you're someone who's living through what I lived through, please know this. It's not your fault. You deserve better. And there are people who will fight for you if you just find the courage to speak up." The porch light cast a warm glow over our small family. As we sat together, no longer victims or survivors, but simply people who'd learned that love is stronger than fear. Truth is more powerful than lies. And sometimes the most important battles are fought, not on distant battlefields, but in the living rooms and dining rooms, where families either flourish or fall apart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, new chances to build the kind of world where children are protected rather than punished, loved rather than controlled. But tonight, surrounded by the people I'd fought to protect, and the peace we'd fought to create, I felt something that had been missing from my life since Sarah died. I felt complete. Sometimes the most important battles we fight aren't on distant battlefields, but in our own living rooms, where we must choose between keeping the peace and protecting the innocent. Bertram Ashcroft's story reminds us that true courage isn't measured by rank or medals, but by our willingness to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, even when it costs us everything. In a world where authority can be misused and silence can be mistaken for loyalty, we learn that real strength comes from speaking truth to power, regardless of the consequences. Diego's transformation from victim to advocate shows us that our deepest wounds can become our greatest sources of wisdom and compassion. His choice to help other children escape the darkness he once knew proves that healing isn't just about moving past our pain. It's about ensuring others never have to experience it. The military taught Bertram to protect and serve, but it was love for his grandson that taught him what those words truly meant. Every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every moment of warmth and safety we take for granted exists because someone somewhere chose to fight for it. Behind every rescued child is an adult who decided that silence wasn't an option, that comfort wasn't worth a child's suffering. Bertram's midnight drive through that Colorado blizzard wasn't just a journey through snow. It was a journey toward justice, toward the kind of love that doesn't just comfort but protects. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.